Okay, good morning
Yes.
and welcome to the Cinder part of the Victoria mid-cycle, Victoria PTG. Yeah, this week has gone pretty fast. Okay, so we're meeting with the Glance team to go over some stuff. So the first topic we're discussing is the Ceph image resize problem. So the problem is basically, since we don't know the size of the image in advance, when there's the Ceph backend um, things take a really long time because the space allocation is very small and you got to do a lot of it. So in train, we discussed this real quickly and decided that what can happen is that the Ceph glance store driver can just allocate way bigger chunks and then resize to fit at the end. And that seemed to be a solution. And Abhishek was just saying that we've basically, this is a notice that the solution's agreed on. We all still agree on it. It's just nobody has stepped up to do it yet. And then the last thing we were just discussing was that there's the Ceph maintainer for Glance Store has become inactive. So we should probably follow up with Julio or somebody, Abhishek, and see if we can get somebody who's a Ceph expert who might be willing to keep an eye on this thing.
Okay.
Because it would be good to have a maintainer. So, okay.
Okay.
So are there any questions? So what I was going to say about that, so Liang Fong had brought this up, but I think it was maybe part of the Starling X thing where they had made a bunch of patches and they're trying to get them back in. So I don't know that he's particularly interested in this issue. He's been working on the volume local cache and doing a lot of work on that. So it's probably taken up all his time. So I don't think he would be stepping up to do that this cycle. Just as sort of I'm just speaking for him because I don't think he's here. But I know that the
Okay.
volume local cache is like a big priority for him, and that's a big chunk of
Mhm.
work. So I don't see him stepping in to do this. Um,
Okay.
so anyway,
Okay.
so anyone here from Cinder side who works with Ceph, that's it shouldn't be too bad a thing to implement, um, but you never know. Anyway, that's a implementation opportunity. Okay, any questions or anything? Okay, let's move to the next one is make Cinder Store compatible with multiple stores. Um,
Yeah. So probably when Glance configures Cinder as a backend in Glance Store, Cinder Store as a backend in Glance Store, we only have to deal with default backend of Cinder. Yeah, there is a facility to use any other volume type or Cinder backend with the help of configuration option Cinder volume type. But if that volume type changes, then we every time we need to reset that in conf file and restart the glance service to use that. So there is no way at this moment where Cinder Store of Glance can utilize multiple volume types of multiple backends configured at Cinder. So this is the one first problem. Second one is if we have multiple Cinder volumes configured, Cinder volume services configured, then how we should have them in Glance store of Cinder? Because there is problem of I think keystone endpoint, how we should set that. That is one thing. So for that purpose, I have updated spec to address the earlier problem where I have recommended. I'm not sure how much perfect solution is this, but where I have recommended to deprecate that Cinder volume type config option and instead define one new command line or API parameter to glance API where we can pass volume type at the time of image creation. So that is the one way I have come up. But if you have any inputs on this, then please let me know.
Yeah, so I'm trying to so it's possible that if you created a special volume type, so the volume type could be tied to a particular Cinder backend, but doesn't have to be. So depending on what, I guess my question would be that the sort of use case, do we want this to be, I guess the idea is we want the end user to be able to specify yeah, actually, if you could you run through the use case again? I'm sorry. So to back up a second, basically the idea is, as far as a glance user is concerned, I just want to put my image into glance. Now, glance has the ability now where we can specify which backend we want to use.
Yes.
And so I guess the idea is, if you want to put it into Cinder, it's possible that you might want to use a particular volume type in Cinder as opposed to just, okay.
One question, when you have multiple stores in Glance, does the user know where each, beside the names of the stores, does the user know exactly the driver that is being used, whether it's Ceph, Cinder, or something else? Or do they just get a name, a generic name that has been configured?
They get configured name and description, so it's all up to the admins if they want to expose that information or not.
Okay, because the option to pass the parameter with the volume type could then, in a way, expose to the user the type of backend that Glance is using. I don't think it's a problem, but it could mean that they have to actually say it in the description or somewhere, so they know that they can actually pass that additional parameter, right?
So it looks like what you'd want to do, yeah, that's a good point, Gorka. It looks like what you'd want to do is on the, you could have like a virtual store in Glance with Cinder, so that you would expose on the Glance side, cheap storage or expensive storage. And then what the Cinder driver would do is select the volume type based on that. So then
that's how all of our stores work. It's literally like that. You use the store ID, which is the name for the store, and there is the description, and we keep in-memory map of those store IDs versus to which backend configuration it goes.
Right. So
we might have pre-Ceph stores that are cheap, expensive, and fast, and that's what the user gets. And when Cinder creates the image out of volume, that's exactly what Cinder can define as well. Cinder has no idea which backend store it actually lands on.
Right.
Just know that, okay, it's going to the fast store.
So I guess the issue is, so you have one block storage service running, and then it's just a matter of when Glance goes to store the image data, it would specify the volume type. You see what I mean? Or do you actually envision separate Cinder services?
Well, we have been discussing about that, but I have no idea. So that's kind of one of those things that do we want to solve that problem for everyone? How do you deploy and expose multiple cinders? I don't think that's on anyone's priority list. But
Okay.
on the same time, like I see no problem accessing same cinder instance through multiple copies of the cinder driver once we get it working. So it doesn't matter. The cinder driver gets the endpoint from the service catalog, and the part of configuration that differs is the volume type. So there is direct mapping between the client store configured and volume type in Cinder, if you just get all that working nicely.
Right. So it seems like from our side, from the Cinder side, there's really nothing. I mean, basically, what we would. It's up to you, but we would. Well, I guess I'm going to speak as a glance core, right? We do want to keep this thing where it's possible to have a deployer define the glance backends where you have no idea what the actual technology is, right? You're just given some description that gives you a reason to choose one from another. So it looks like the way to do that, if you wanted to use, so if an operator wants to use the Cinder backend and also wants to have different classes of storage, then it would be up to the operator to actually configure it so that you have, so from our point of view, on the Cinder side, that would be tied to volume type. So you'd have different volume types. So it's just a matter of when you, on the glance side, make the request, you need to include a volume type. But how you do that, we don't really care. Does that seem about right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think our biggest problem getting the multi-store Cinder working is gonna be how we track the locations, and that's just internal glance problem. Because the URI is basically same for all the different Cinder store types.
It's just cinder://image ID.
But that's okay because you'll be able to get your stuff. And then in the glance metadata, you'd know which store it was in. I mean, virtual store. So I think the way to, I may be oversimplifying, but I think the way to think of this is that with the Cinder store, it's going to have multiple virtual stores that are tied to Cinder volume types. But as far as Cinder's concerned and Glance, I mean, Glance just says, hey, give me this volume, and Cinder does that. And then it's going to be up to the Glance side to say, this is expensive storage, or this is cheap storage, or whatever. Right, because retrieving the volume, you don't care about the volume type anymore. Once it's created, you've got the UUID. We'll just give it to you.
Well, as we have seen over past cycle or so, we seem to need to care way more than we thought of.
Well, yeah, there are some complexities. Yes.
I have one question here. So what we're talking about is when we configure multiple Cinder stores on the Glance side, then do we need to have one-to-one mapping of that stores to the Cinder backends? Like if we have multi-backends configured on the Cinder side, LVM, Ceph, or NFS. So if we configure 3 Glance Cinder stores, then do we need, like, is the design plan like we need to have one-to-one mapping of those stores to those backends? Is it like that?
Yeah, it should be one-to-one mapping in that case.
Actually, so what I understood on our discussion, was it yesterday or day before, I think that's not the case. So we will have one-to-one mapping between Cinder volume type and a glance store. But there is no way we as a Cinder consumer can actually dictate whatever backends you happen to be scheduling for that volume type. So
Yeah,
it's just
I'm just talking.
mapping between volume type and glance store.
Yeah, I was saying that we can dedicate volume types to specific backends and then configure them on the glance side. Then we have multiple one-to-one back mapping, like from the glance store to the volume type to the Cinder backend.
Yes, but that's a deployment detail up to the admin's consideration. That's not something we can enforce anywhere.
Right.
Uh, I'm not clear about the design side.
Yeah, actually, what you're saying is feasible, but Erno is saying like we cannot force a deployer to have a dedicated volume type for glance in the store.
We have no way of enforcing that every single Cinder store is mapped to only one backend in Cinder, and I don't know if anyone wants to even do that. Like, it might be one dedicated backend, it might be a pool of backends that goes through the scheduler, like you guys described to us earlier, that it's not necessarily tied to a single backend. And that's kind of the thing, like, we cannot expect that one-to-one mapping from glance store to Cinder backend happen. Only thing what we can be sure is that we just get what is described on that volume type.
So like, I guess the problem is, right, depending on what backends Cinder has affects how you can, right? So if we're using an NFS backend, then the way it actually gets attached so that you can get the volume out is going to be different, right? The glance Cinder store has to do different work depending on whether it's sort of a normal iSCSI kind of thing or whether it's NFS.
But the work would be done later on, right? When it's going to actually use it. And by that time, it actually has that information. First, it would call to create an attachment, and it would get some connection information. There, you have a field that tells you exactly what you're getting.
So then
This
you
is
know.
iSCSI, yeah. And at that point, you can, if you need additional steps or anything else, you can actually do that. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, okay.
And that's how I handled the NFS case right now. Yeah.
So it seems like, I mean, I'm probably oversimplifying again, but it seems like we've got the ability to, so that a deployer can define different classes of storage if they're using the Cinder store. And they would do it through volume type. And then, right, and then Glance just needs to know which volume this is. And then when you get it out of the store, you attach it appropriately. And then you can get the data out of it. So it's like, it does put extra effort on the deployer, but if they want to do this kind of thing, they're going to have to do that anyway.
Yeah, but it's kind of the similar thing as what we are living at the moment. We just have a one single instance of Cinder, which means that we can only give one volume type. But we are already in a situation where we have no idea what kind of connection we get before we actually start using that volume.
So I'm thinking it seems like it makes sense to change the Cinder, the Glance store, Cinder store. so that it can pass volume types, which it does,
It
right?
currently pass volume types, yes, but
Yes, sir.
So it looks like you could, right, configure it to have. I mean, it seems like the step that's missing is that on the glance side, you want to expose to the user 3 different classes of storage. The Cinder driver only recognizes 1 volume type at the moment. So
Right.
if you can somehow make the connection between glance store, right, glance storage class and a volume type, then we'd be able to just use the same driver, right, just one Cinder driver to handle different classes of storage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and honestly, I think we just didn't have enough understanding of Tinder and the volume types and all that when the multi-store work was done to actually understand how to do this. So that was kind of like just orphan child at that point that we get back to the Cinder driver at some point if it becomes necessary. And it looks like it's more popular than we thought, so it might be a good idea to actually get it done. But I
Right.
think we have got quite a bit of more knowledge now when Riot has been working with these things and being active with us to actually understand what we are dealing with, so that we might be able to get that done. It just I think the big part of this discussion is like, but it sounds like you guys don't have any big concerns about that, how that's done, and you don't have massive needs for having multiple Cinder clusters actually running. So, because that's one big part of this whole discussion is the Glance Cinder store gets the Cinder endpoint directly from the service catalog,
Correct.
which means that configuring multiple Cinder services for Glance would be a problem. But if the plan is to keep going as we are and just rely on volume types, I think that makes the work quite a bit easier.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So that's good. Yeah. So the Cinder driver is slightly different from the other drivers, possibly. Anyway, okay. So it looks like, yeah. So as far as yeah, if you just implement the ability to pass the volume type, which you have, it's just on your side you want to select which one based on the store that the user picks. But it doesn't need to be exposed to Cinder in any way. So that seems good. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's, we can always follow up on this if it, you know, after you think
Yeah.
about it. It doesn't seem as simple as it
Yeah,
does.
so we will discuss this internally and we'll decide how we should go ahead and implement this. And once spec is ready, I will ask some of the Cinder guys to review it.
Okay, that
So,
sounds good.
so we will get some inputs on that.
Okay, great. All right, and then the next topic we had was this one's Rajat, you're going to do this. So the gate job for the Glance Cinder store.
yeah, so there is not much discussion regarding this, but I would like to summarize this. So we have been planning, we have been working on DevStack side to set up Cinder store in Glance. Eric posted that patch and Sophia was working on it. So we currently have a setup that runs DevStack and we can install Cinder store for Glance. So I use the same patch to run a gate job on the Glance store side, and it basically what it does is it tests the add, get, delete, all those methods that are common to all the stores. So we have a running Cinder store job on the Glance store side for the basic operations. But what I really wanted to do was testing a real scenario. When we get a request on the glance gate, and when we get a request on the glance side and glance directs it towards the Cinder store, and then we get a created volume, image volume, and that. So I wanted to do a gate job with respect to that, like covering the real scenario on the glance gate. So I wanted opinion, like, is it the right way to do it, or are there any flaws or any type of thing? Like,
Yeah, I guess currently we have say one safe job running on glance side, which is non-voting at the moment. So similarly, we can have this Cinder job as well. Initially, we will keep it as non-voting to see what exactly and how this whether it is achieved what we want to do so far, and then probably we will take ahead and make it voting depending on the needs. So that is my point of view. Erno, do you have any concerns about this?
So, just question out of the interest, what Cinder backend are you planning to use on that? And are you planning to make that like a multi-node gate job so that we get actual storage traffic going between the VMs, or how are you planning to do that?
yeah, that also I wanted to add. So currently the job that is running on the glance store gate is LVM job, and I really wasn't sure about how to like if it is possible to configure multiple. Like I think it is possible to configure multiple backends from the stack side, but putting into a gate job. So yeah, I'm really not sure about that as well. So I just had this idea of doing it, but yeah, that is the valid thing, like which backend to use, and if you want to use multiple backends, then configure multiple gate jobs or do it in a single gate job. So yeah, I'm not clear about that.
So do you actually have a something working? So how is that LVM exposed to the glance driver? Does that mean that we need more special sauce into the glance driver to be able to talk to the LVM, or is that exposed on some other way to the actual store driver?
So currently in that gate job only LVM driver is configured. So basically that's the default type, and whatever glance creates, like however glance create images on the Cinder side, it will always be created on the LVM side. So that is how it works currently.
Yeah, so that is why I said if we are going to go ahead with this, we should go ahead with keeping this as non-voting. As and when we find a way to configure multiple backends in the gates, we should go ahead and implement those, and then decide whether we should keep it as a voting or continue as a non-voting, just to be sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we definitely want this tested, so anything's going to be better than nothing. I think these base functional tests, just expect that there's a. Actually, I don't remember how they work anymore, so I'm going to shut up about that. But
How
see,
so? Can Cinder have like multiple LVM backends?
Yep.
Yes, it can.
So we can even simulate a multi-store still within a box by just configuring multiple LVM backends on Cinder, tying them with different volume types, and exposing and configuring them as a different stores in Glance when we get the multi-store done.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I think we can do that. Yeah.
Oh, I think that sounds like a massive improvement compared to the situation where we are now, when we have a handful of unit tests and that's all.
Yeah, I
Yes,
agree.
yes, right.
So I guess the moral of this one is we encourage you to do this, Rashad.
Yeah, I can start working on that now.
Good.
Rajat just needs to do all the things.
Yeah, he's becoming
Yeah, I've
indispensable.
noticed. It sounds like the rest of you guys are just scratching your tummies and going like, "Oh, Rajat, there is this nice thing. Go."
Yes, we're very happy to let anyone work on Git Glance.
Yeah, so basically, I just sit beside Rajat and I know how he works.
And you know where he lives.
So,
So
yeah.
Yeah. So we can start doing that as well. We can lift our legs, our feet on the table, and just point to Rajat like, "Hey, there is that Glance thing as well, which would be nice. Would you mind?"
He never says no.
That's good to know.
okay, were there any other questions about that one, or
Yeah, but there is another one topic which is not
okay.
listed here,
Okay.
which is about glance image co-location.
All right.
In
Okay.
in Usuri, we have already made a progress where we are sending base image ID to glance.
Right.
Yeah, but Erno has another idea where Erno, would you like to explain?
Remember what we discussed, because I'm drawing blank at the moment. I can't remember
Yeah,
what we
so
had there. Right?
you said instead of sending base image ID to glance, it should be good so that sender should make another call to copy image or import,
Oh, yes.
copy or import call. Yeah.
Yeah. So a minor change into the plan what we discussed, because the base image is going through the image create call, which means that because of how Glance has designed internally, it's absolute pain in the dick trying to get that tapped into our task flows that does the actual heavy lifting of moving data around. So what would be super amazing if we could modify the copy image import job so that you can give it either list of stores, all stores flag, or the base image ID. And if you give it the base image ID, it would do this co-location. So it would just go to the database and see, okay, the image is in these stores, and use that as a store list where it copies it. And it would just like changing that call so that we don't send the base image ID as a part of the image creation call, but just do another API call after the data is uploaded to tell Glance like, hey, by the way, we want it to be co-located with this image ID. That would make our lives so much easier, and the actual Glance code much cleaner. and that would also avoid us needing to have the client hanging and waiting until the call finishes. So would that be something you guys would be okay with, to change the calls on your glance interfacing code?
So run that by me again, what the difference would be. So right now we're just doing, right, we just create the image and then send you the data.
Yeah, so at the moment there is so first you create the image and you give the image parameters with that create call. And one of those image parameters is base image ID. And then you upload the data via image upload. So it goes via the old-fashioned image creation process, that once the upload has finished, it's streamed directly to the backend, and the image flips active. And so the problem with that is that it goes via all the domain layers, the whole onion thing of glance, and we have no hooks in there to tap into the async task flows. So what I would like to see us doing is instead not sending it part of the image create call, creating the image as before any of this discussed, upload the data, and after you get the 200 of that upload, you just send a image import call to copy image job that gets the base image ID as a parameter, which triggers a task flow that copies the image to all of those stores where it was supposed to be co-located in.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, at first glance, it just seems so it would be a change in the Cinder side client that connects to Glance.
Yes. So it's literally like, the nice thing is that the heavy lifting has been done, so that part of the Cinder code has already the image ID, the base image ID in knowledge. It's just matter of few line changes of not sending it as a part of that first call, but just doing a extra API call at the end before exiting that path and sending that base image ID as a separate API call to Glance. Because it goes to task flow, it's actually a really quick API call.
Right.
Because it goes to async, so the client on the Cinder end will not need to be waiting that the copying has happened or anything. It just gets response right back, and Glance does its thing behind the scenes after that.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem problematic. I don't remember the code on our side, whether it just sends. I think we wait to the.
So the code from
Yeah,
your side,
currently,
like, yeah, go ahead, Rajat. You have implemented that.
yeah, so it just sends the base image ID while creating the glance image. So I think it's feasible. I'm just looking at the code right now. I also don't remember much, but I think we can do that. But
So
Yeah, as long as
yeah,
if we're already waiting and it's not a fire and forget kind of thing, then we can do this. That's the thing I'm not quite sure about. So if we're waiting anyway for for it to complete on our side, then yeah, we could just make a call right at the end of that.
Yeah, because how the upload works, there is no other option. Like the client has to wait until the data has landed on the backend before Glance returns
Yeah.
200 or any failure back to the client. So you are waiting for all that image upload anyways.
Yeah, so I would leave this as This seems plausible, but we reserve the right on looking more closely to say that this is not a good idea. But I think it seems doable.
Okay.
Let me just put a note on here so we don't forget. I mean, I'm sure Rajat's going to remember this, but for the rest of us. So
So the import call you were talking about, so we can do it from glance slide, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's doable.
So basically, from the Cinder side, we're just making a single call, and we get back. I don't know, what do we return, a 202 or something? It doesn't really matter. And then we don't do anything more. You've got the data already, so we won't do anything. We just say, hey,
Yeah.
you either
So
do
you
something
just
or
need to
don't.
make one additional call.
That seems plausible. So we'll see what happens when somebody actually goes to look at it. But I think it's not really a change, and it's a quick call, so it shouldn't be bad. All right, so just put seems reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, so as long as you are not doing anything really weird on that upload call, like throwing it on Lambda or something like that, it should be pretty fine waiting, because I think you wait until you get the image active anyways before you mark that image creation successful.
Yeah, I just don't remember what that code's doing, but
Yeah.
I
But
believe
it just matter if in principle that sounds reasonable.
yeah.
In that case, I will just go and do a change on that copy job so that it actually accepts base image IDE as a target parameter.
Okay.
So at that point, then we can experiment with this. I just didn't want to go and spend the time to implement something that ends up being fundamentally disagreeable and wasting my time. So that's why we wanted to run this through you guys before I go and do it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. It seems. Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions, comments, or anything?
So I'll let Rajat know when that has merged so that he can do the work again. Thanks, Rajat.
All right. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that we can give the Glance team a recording just of the stuff they did. So I'm going to stop and then restart.